Actually, you have already touched upon my next question, which is thinking about our Turkish friends who travel widely around the world. If we were to show them 3 places where they can quickly understand the global nature of Spain, of Spanish history, or Hispanic history, if you want, and 3 characters, 3 persons of that history which you describe in your book, they would be surprised to meet and to learn about, because they embody this global and hybrid, if you want, or mixed blooded nature of Spanish culture. Which ones would you choose? Which ones would you suggest?
Well, very difficult. There are dozens, hundreds of them. But since we are talking to our Turkish friends, I would like to start by someone who made a trip to Central Asia via Turkey. His name was Clavijo. He was an ambassador of a Castilian king, Henry III, in the early 15th century. You know that, and it's not a secret, that Spain and Turkey were, let's say, enemies and adversaries for a long time. Because of that, because they were expanding and expansionary powers. So, and they belong to different religions, to different cultures. So they met in the Mediterranean, of course, and there were plenty of battles and so on and so forth. But there were also exchanges. And I will say that one of the first ones was this embassy by Clavijo to Tamerlán. It was not an embassy sent to Turkey as such, to the Ottoman Empire, but it had to do with the Ottoman Empire. And it's a very interesting story because the Ottoman Empire at the time in the 15th century, the early 15th century, was expanding westwards. So at that time, Spain was not still Spain, it was a collection of kingdoms. One of them, Castilla, was becoming the hegemon, let's say, the one that finally, let's say, was the main actor in the unification of Spain. And at the time, one of the Castilian kings was interested in getting to know better what the Ottoman Empire was trying to do. So this king sent some spies to the valley of Ankara, so very close to where the place you are now. And the timing was so good that those spies arrived at the valley of Ankara precisely once a momentous battle was taking place. And it was the battle between the armies of the Ottoman Empire and the armies of Tamerlán. Tamerlán was an empire maker, but his power base was farther to the east, in today's Uzbekistan. So he was moving west, but not towards Western Europe, towards the Ottoman Empire. And both empires collided, and Tamerlán won. So the army of Tamerlán took these Castilian empires as prisoners, not knowing who they were. So when they explained that they belonged to a kingdom that was also an enemy of the Ottoman Empire, so Tamerlán sent them back and asked the Castilian king to send an embassy, a formal embassy. And that was the embassy of Clavijo. And Clavijo wrote a memoir, a diary of his voyage through the Eastern Mediterranean, part of today's Turkey, part of today's Iran, and then to Samarkand. Well, when we talk about Turkey, we talk not only about a country, an empire, we talk, as is also the case of Spain, we talk about a civilization. So we know that in Central Asia, and I was posted there as a diplomat 20 years ago in Kazakhstan, so I got to know, let's say, Turkish culture through that far eastern point of view. the influence of Turkish and also Persian culture on Central Asia was already huge. So basically, what Tamerlan was doing was creating a mixture of Persian and Turkish, or a mixture of Turkish-Persian empire with cultural influences from both. So what Clavijo witnessed was the emergence of that huge cultural area from Istanbul to the, let's say, the Chinese Wall. I remember when I was in Almaty in 1999, my Turkish friends belonging to the or working in the Turkish embassy, what they were trying to do was to revive those early connections between Turkey, then the Ottoman Empire, and Central Asia, building upon, of course, the fact that many Central Asian countries, of course, all of them is Tajikistan, speak Turkic languages, and were very much influenced, for instance, in terms of religion by Sufi brotherhoods, some of them coming from Turkey. Mm-hmm. So if I will start by mentioning a character that symbolizes the early expansion of Spain, and at the same time its early connection with Turkey or the Turkish cultural world, it will be Clavijo, right? So that's one of those connecting characters. The others I will choose are not maybe so evident for a Turkish audience, but are very, very interesting. The second one will be Inca Garcilaso de la Vega. Well, just to explain, he was the son of a Spanish conquistador and an Inca princess in Peru. So when he was a child, he was raised, he said, I was drinking milk from my Inca mother at the same time that I was eating the bread from my Spanish father. So he took the best of both worlds, Spanish and Amerindian and Inca, and he became, for me at least, the first modern American man, in the sense that he became a writer, a philosopher. He left America to come to Spain in order to connect with his father's family, and also to claim his right to the inheritance when his father died. So he spent the last part of his life in Spain, but he never forgot about his Inca origins. What he did was the following. He wrote the first history of the Americas, and particularly the Inca Empire, for an Spanish-European audience. So he was the first American historian. Mm-hmm. But more than that, he was the first American who commented on European philosophy. He wrote a translation of the Diálogos de Amor, the love dialogues, by a Neoplatonist Jew, Portuguese-Italian author. He translated those dialogues into Spanish, and then he commented on them. Imagine, I mean, here you have a half Inca, familiar with Latin, with Greek, with Italian, with Spanish, with Neoplatonic philosophy, with classical philosophy, and being able to bridge the gap between the Americas and Europe in such a way, because he was also a wonderful writer, that he embodies precisely the mingling, the connection between two worlds that had been apart from most of the history. So Inca Garcilaso for me is another pivotal character in the history of global Spain. The third one as I said, there are many. I mean, I should be talking about Velázquez, Goya, about Góngora, Lope, Quevedo, Calderón. I will be talking about, I mean, so many. But no, I rather prefer to choose those theoretically minor characters, in the sense that they are not well known beyond Spain or the Americas, and even within Spain and the Americas, they are not very well known, but who represent that global character of Spanish culture, that capacity to connect. So the third character, and I'm sorry, but I will have to talk about a fourth one, which comes to my mind now, but the third character will be another Amerindian, Domingo Chimalpahin, who lived in Mexico City, and who, for the mature years of his life, he wrote a diary. And in that diary, he wrote everything that happened in Mexico and the world, and the wider world, during his lifespan. And it's amazing. I mean, because one day he could be witnessing the arrival of a Japanese embassy in Mexico on their way to Europe. Another day he will be commented on the assassination attempt against King Henry IV in France. Another day he could be writing down or jotting down his, scribbling down in his diary about the passing of a comet. So here you have an Amerindian writing both in his vernacular language and in Spanish about events that were so far away from his daily life, but with which he was familiar with, thanks to the fact that Mexico at the time was basically the center of the world. Mm-hmm. I mean, again, not Madrid, not Rome, not Naples. I mean, the place where East and West and the Americans met were in places like Mexico, or Cuzco, or Lima, or Panama, or Manila. And Manila brings me to the fourth character that I will comment on. So you have Clavijo, which a little bit symbolizes the meeting between Spain and Central Asia. Then you have, because we forgot about Central Asia or Eurasia and we moved to America, the Americas in the 16th century, you have a character like Inca Garcilaso or Chimalpahin. And then you have another wonderful character, a Spaniard of Basque origins, Andrés de Urdaneta. And if you ask me to say a name that symbolizes the emergence of globalization, that will be it, Andrés de Urdaneta. Why? Well, his life could make a very interesting Hollywood movie. And I hope that one day one could be made about his life. He was a youngster who, born in the Basque Country, learned or heard about the first circumnavigation of the globe by a fellow countryman, Elcano. Again, talking about globalization, that was it. I mean, the first circumnavigation of the globe by the expedition of Magellan and Elcano. So Elcano was the survivor of that expedition as a captain, together with another 18 sailors, some of them from other European countries, and even there was a former slave who was part of the crew. But when Elcano returned to Spain, far from settling down and, I mean, live a life of calm and being respected by everyone and so on, he was such an adventurer that he wanted to get back to the seas. So he enrolled several years later in another expedition whose main aim was to go from Spain via the Strait of Magellan to at the time called Spicy Islands, the Moluccas, but more or less in between the Philippines and Indonesia. So the Moluccas at the time belonged to Portugal. But the second Loaiza Elcano expedition tried to find a way to get to the Spicy Islands without infringing upon the Portuguese rights. That was the main geopolitical aim of the expedition. So Andrés de Urdaneta was 15, 16 years old at the time. So he escaped from his home. He enrolled in that expedition. That expedition was a disaster in the sense that I think there were 4 ships, but only one reached the Moluccas. And originally the crew was like 600 and only 100 made it to the Moluccas. One of them was Andrés de Urdaneta. So he lived there in the Moluccas for 6 years, fighting against the Portuguese, fighting against the local people, being allied with others, local polities. He was finally captured by the Portuguese and back to Lisbon. He escaped, got back to Valladolid, met with Charles V, with the emperor, and said there has to be a way, not only for us Spaniards to get to Asia, the Philippines, the Moluccas, without infringing, as I said before, upon the Portuguese rights, but also to get back from the Philippines, from Asia to America, and then to Europe. It was called the Tornaviaje. And it was, at the time, thought to be impossible. So Urdaneta, after so many vicissitudes in his life, he went to the Americas as a conquistador, then he became a monk. And when he was a monk, many years later, he received a letter by Philip II saying, you had to get back to the seas from Acapulco, go to the Philippines, and then find a way to get from the Philippines back to America. If no one has been able to discover that way back from Asia to America, if there is someone who can do it, you are the man. Urdaneta was like 60 years old at the time, he was very old. But he did it. And he discovered that journey back from the Philippines to America. And that made possible, as I said before, the regular 2 times per year connections from Manila to Acapulco, from Veracruz to Spain. And that route that he discovered lasted for 250 years. And it made possible, I mean, that, for instance, Spanish-American silver finally made his way into the Chinese economy, or that silk, ceramics, books made their way from China via the Philippines to Americas and to Europe. So he was the father of globalization as we know it, Andrés de Urdaneta.
Fantastic. Then as the last question, we could go on talking about global Spain and global matters for hours, and it's so exciting and really entertaining to listen to you. But I would like to end on a more personal note. As you're a diplomat, you're a writer, and you are a traveler, and surely you have visited this country we are working at right now, Turkey. What are your memories, your fondest memories, or those memories of aspects of Turkey that are precisely in line with what we are discussing today, the global or the civilizational outreach of a country like Turkey?
It's a fascinating country, and I have visited many times. Unfortunately, most of the times, in between connections to get from Europe to Central Asia or the Caucasus, where I was also posted at some time in my previous reincarnations as a diplomat. As I said, my first encounter with Turkey was in Kazakhstan, and particularly in the border between Kazakhstan and China, because as our Turkish friends know, their language and their ethnicity comes from that part of the world, somewhere in between the Ili River, marking the border between Kazakhstan and China, and the Orkhon River in Mongolia. So I had the opportunity to travel a lot along the sea roads and in Inner Mongolia, Western China, and so on. And I met once my way into the Orkhon Valley, also to the Ili River, where the first Proto-Turkic scripts were written on a stone, literally. So my first encounter with Turkey or things associated with Turkey were that far away in Mongolia or Eastern Kazakhstan. But it had to do with the cradle of Turkish civilization. So that was for me fantastic. Of course, being in Kazakhstan, my Kazakh friends, many of them spoke Turkish. I mean, it's not that far away from Kazakh. And of course, I have to say that it was thanks to a Turkish restaurant that gastronomically I was able to survive for 3 years, because I have to say that I love Kazakhstan, but the gastronomy of the nomadic people is a little bit beyond my taste. I love horse meat and so on and so forth, but being fed on it every day is a little bit so. Having access to Turkish food, which I love, it was obviously something that made my day back then. So later on, from different postings, I was posted in Vienna, but in an organization called the OSCE, Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. At the time, in the early 90s, it had a lot of, relations with the Caucasus, with Central Asia also. So I had to travel a lot to Azerbaijan, Armenia, Tajikistan, Kazakhstan via Istanbul. So I profited to spend a couple of days every time I could. And also when I was able to stay longer to visit other places, I love in particular the shores of the Black Sea, the Marmara Strait and so on. But there is a place, of course, Istanbul, we could talk, for hours about Istanbul. That will be another day. What a city, what a city. But the place fascinated me the most, because I love archaeology, was a place called Göbekli Tepe. And it's an archaeological site, I think it's southeastern Turkey, which is fascinating because it is the site where the first sacred place has been found. The first, call it temple, call it church, call it a Paleolithical Stonehenge type kind of worshiping place. But it's amazing because it goes back to the 9,000 years before our common era. And I think it was discovered by a German archaeologist in the second half of the 20th century. And it puzzled historians and archaeologists, because it was thought at the time that organized religion, the kind that requires a place to worship, a place to bury people according to certain rites and so on, was associated with the birth of agriculture, with sedentary societies. But here, no. 9,000 years before our common era, we were hunters-gatherers. And there you have a sacred place, a temple, dating back to those times when we were nomads, when basically we were not supposed to be doing those things. So that being in Turkey, it has a special meaning for me. I love it. I really read again and again about this new discovery that it's made at the place and so on. Also, I like very much, of course, Antalya and the archaeological sites, the Hittite civilization connected to Egypt and so on. So what attracts me about Turkey is also like Spain, let's say. It's not a country, it's not a state, it's a civilization. And it's not just any kind of civilization, it's a connecting civilization. East and West, of course, geographically speaking is very obvious, but also from a cultural point of view. So from that point of view, I have to say that you are privileged to be posted there and have the opportunity to learn the language and study about it, and share every day with such a fascinating people and culture.
Indeed, and And the thing is that, talking about connecting, we would love to have you, Luis, around here in Turkey as soon as it is possible and healthy to travel, because we feel you have so many things to tell our Turkish friends, and vice versa. Excellent historians and anthropologists and people studying culture here in Turkey, and it would be a great pleasure for us to try and set up something so that we can enjoy you in person, and also visit those places with you. By the way,
I'm much better on a screen than in person, I have to say, so you will be disappointed, but
Göbekli Tepe is featured even on a Netflix series. If you want to check it out, so it's a big thing in Turkey as well these days.
Yes, absolutely. It will be a pleasure to be there, but when I will go there, because I hope it's not a matter of if, but when, it will not be to teach, but to learn.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Luis Martínez Montes, for your time. And we will be sharing information about your books, your magazine, and hopefully also some images of the characters and the places you have been talking about on our social media on Monday. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you to you.